Imagine having the backing of the biggest corporation in the entire world. Imagine having the most studios out of any gaming console manufacturer in the industry. Imagine having the best cloud infrastructure out of any console maker in the business, allowing you to spread your ecosystem even further than your competitors could ever dream of. With all these assets and possibilities, you'd surely be at the top of the industry. There's no way you're not. Huh. So yeah, let's talk about Xbox. If you've not been living under rocks for the last few weeks, you will have heard about Xbox shutting down 4 of their in-house studios, which is pretty bad in light of their ongoing acquisition spree of studios in the past few years. The 4 studios that are being shut down include mobile dev AlphaDog Studios, makers of Mighty Doom, Roundhouse Games, whose devs are being funneled into ZeniMax Online Studios to work on The Elder Scrolls Online, Arcane Austin, who were behind last year's Redfall, which was a
Oh my god, bro.
Oh, hell no, man. What the fuck, man? Get your ass on, boy. You get your goddamn ugly ass on.
dumpster fire, absolute travesty, straight to the butt cheeks. And last but not least, Tango Gameworks. The studio behind Xbox's last good exclusive game with universal praise, Hi-Fi Rush. A game that, mind you, won 5 Goldie Awards in 2023, and to quote the VP of Xbox, was a success on every metric, according to them. In fact, another Xbox executive gave us a new banger of a quote just after Tango Gameworks was shut down. Matt Booty, the head of Xbox Game Studios, recently told employees at Xbox Studios that, and I quote, "We need smaller games that give us prestige and awards." You mean games like Hi-Fi Rush that don't take hundreds of millions to develop? Unlike most AAA games nowadays? Damn, that's a great idea actually. How about you just greenlight Hi-Fi Rush 2 and... oh, wait, never mind. You can't because you just shut them down. Like, what the hell, Xbox? What in the world are you doing? How are you going to leave the third spot if you're going to shut down the studio that made your most critically acclaimed game in a long time? And Tango didn't just make games that were critically acclaimed, their productivity was something other studios could have taken a few notes from as well. They released Ghostwire Tokyo in March of 2022, less than a year before they released Hi-Fi Rush in January of 2023, after it was shadow dropped during the Xbox Direct. Game development cycles now unfortunately take 4 to 6 years. Shutting down a studio that had the capabilities to work on 2 titles simultaneously is definitely one of the decisions of all time. Like, especially if you're the owner of a game subscription service. You know, something that needs new games all the time. Like, hello, is anybody there? Because who is making these asinine decisions? But Hi-Fi Rush was set up for failure from the get-go. Shadow dropping a game with zero marketing beforehand during a direct is some nasty work. Don't get me wrong, shadow dropping a game can work for some games. But shadow dropping a niche ass rhythm game? A rhythm action game? On Xbox. You know, the shooter box. Like, come on, be for real. Dropping an action game with the premise of having to hit opponents on beat to deal extra damage might have worked on the Nintendo Switch, since a game like that would be perfect for that audience. But doing all this on Xbox of all places? As a shadow drop too? Nah nigga, you had that game spawning with 1 HP wondering why I didn't put up more of a fight in the saved shots. That's crazy. That being said, the shutdown of Tango Gameworks in Arcane Austin is completely unjustified in my eyes. Wait, didn't this nigga just shit on Arcane Austin a minute ago? Including Arcane Austin here may sound a bit weird after my previous comments just now, but hold on a sec, let me cook. Redfall is a truly terrible game, but having one bad, even horrible project shouldn't spell the death of your studio. Especially if, you know, your publisher is part of the richest company in the entire world. I mean, we're talking about a studio that has proven itself to be capable of making some bangers, like their 2017 release Prey. The game was unfortunately a commercial flop, but gained a lot of popularity years after its release. Having a studio with a cult classic on hand that would be willing to go back and make a sequel is another opportunity that was essentially squandered here. Instead, the last project this team made was a game they didn't even want to develop in the first place. See, before Microsoft acquired Bethesda, there was an internal shift going on at their parent company ZeniMax. ZeniMax wanted their studios to create games with a broader appeal, in which they could sell us some good old microtransactions. because gamers surely love some good old additional monetization in their games. Yeah, right. This vision wasn't very popular with the ground floor devs at Arcane Austin, but there isn't much you can do as a low-level employee when leadership is on board with the idea as well, which is why we were graced with the dumpster fire that became Redfall. But the thing is that ZeniMax was acquired by Microsoft during Redfall's development. The higher-ups at Xbox would have known about the rocky development of the game, and the fact that the devs didn't even want to make that game in the first place. The only problem here is that they just didn't care, as it seems. Oh, wait a minute. They definitely did care. In fact, they did care enough about the game to make it their first $70 retail release. Yep, the heads at Xbox saw that broken mess of a game and said, you know what? Yeah, let's charge $70 for this. The head of Xbox, Phil Spencer, later came out and publicly apologized for the fact that they sold customers that unfinished mess of a game. I mean, saying sorry is the least you could do after selling players a game that barely works for $70. But hey, Gamepass, so who cares, right? It only cost them about 70% of the developers that worked on 2017's Prey, which left the studio during Redfall's development. 70% of staff worked on a beloved game, leaving the studio for a live service game that was dead on arrival and scored a 56 on Metacritic. Now that's what I call a business decision if I've ever seen one. The fact that they released Redfall in the state that it was in and let the studio burn itself out over a game they didn't even want to make is just insane. But hey, it's free in Game Pass, so the state the game released in doesn't really matter, since they can just update it later. It's a live service game anyway, so it doesn't have to be good at launch. You only got it on Game Pass anyway, so nothing of value was lost here, right? Game Pass is at the core of every decision that Xbox makes at this point. From what games they release to how they work their business. Let's get into why that is exactly and how they're digging their own grave by doing so. Game Pass, the so-called Netflix of gaming, also known as the best deal in gaming, granting consumers access to a vast, continually updating list of games, frequent day one releases of some third-party games, and access to all Xbox Studios games on their release. All this for just $9.99 a month, a deal that is just too good to be true. And exactly that is the crux of the issue. Game Pass isn't just too good to be true because it's an amazing deal. It's too good to be true because something that it just doesn't work. And it's just getting more and more obvious as the time goes on. Subscription services by themselves can work, of course, but the scale of consumers necessary to make them work varies immensely for every industry. And Game Pass never had this chance of reaching these lofty numbers in the first place in this industry. If you stop and think about it for a second, the obvious holes in such a plan become painfully obvious. Games normally take 4 to 6 years of development. If a studio is extremely efficient, they might pump out a game in 3 years. That's a long ass time that is being spent on a single project, and all this costs a truckload of money. Let's say that the average AAA game takes 4 years to make and costs $100 million to develop. The vast majority of games usually make most of the money in the launch window of their game. That's when the price and the consumer interest is at its highest point and will only wane over time. There are exceptions like evergreen games that just always sell well, and the usual sports and live service games where player retention is important as well. But even those games will probably make a giant chunk of their sales in the launch window. So if you were a game dev looking to sell your game that you and your team just painstakingly developed over multiple years, burning truckloads of money in the process, how would you sell it? Would you sell your game for $70 or $60 and probably recoup most of your dev costs and make a profit almost immediately? Or put your game in a subscription service for cash upfront and cannibalize your launch sales in the process? Most devs will probably choose the former end for a good reason, but everyone has a price, and Microsoft was eager to accommodate that in the beginning at least. Having 2/3 of your dev costs recouped before the game even launches sounds rather appealing after all, does it not? The only problem is that paying hundreds of millions for dozens of games regularly is pretty hard on the bank in the long run. Heck, according to Microsoft's own estimates, the cost of having frequent third-party day one releases is essentially unsustainable. During the court trial for the Activision Blizzard buyout, Microsoft basically leaked their own internal documents, which showed cost estimates for third-party games on Game Pass, and the figures for some of these games were incredibly high. Assassin's Creed Mirage, $100 million. Mortal Kombat 1, 250 million. Star Wars Jedi Survivor, 300 million. Are we seeing a pattern here? 100 million, even for a smaller scale A-list, or maybe B-list nowadays, AAA game. There are of course cheaper games on the list like Dragon Ball Breakers for 20 million, but people aren't driven to the service by smaller games. People want the big guns. They are driven to the service by the blockbusters, not the smaller scale games. Hearing stuff like, hey bro, they got a new Mortal Kombat 1 on Gamepass for just $10 a month, dog. You gotta hop on that, man. It's a lot more enticing compared to, yo bro, they got that Return to Monkey Island on Gamepass, bruh. You gotta get on that Gamepass, man. I swear, you missing out big time, bro. Come on, come on. The smaller scale games are definitely nice to have, but they don't drive subscription numbers unless they are sleeper hits like Palworld. And Xbox desperately needs these bigger games to drive up the subscription numbers to make Game Pass work in the first place. Especially since they have been missing their sales targets for years now. Xbox expects Game Pass to reach 100 million subs by 2030, which is just wow. Just wow. Definitely a target, alright. Thing is that they've already been continuously missing their sub count goals since 2021. 3 years of missed growth targets for the new centerpiece of their business strategy in a row. Combined with the fact that Game Pass growth on console of all things has slowed down to a crawl at best, says it all. And if there's one group that will be easiest to convert into Game Pass subscribers, it will be your direct customers on Xbox. But that platform has, according to Microsoft themselves, already reached critical mass and is currently setting slower than the Xbox One did launch aligned. If you can't hit your target numbers after maximizing your core base, you're reaching for the stars, my guy, and in the worst way possible at that. At this point in time, Xbox Game Pass has 34 million subscribers, with growth of the service stagnating more and more. Xbox desperately needs bigger and more games to attract new subscribers, but when it costs hundreds of millions to get third-party games on the service in the first place, it's better to own the games as a publisher instead of paying another to put it on your servers, because at that point, the cost of developing the game in-house would be the exact same. And this is the exact reasoning that led to Microsoft's acquisition spree and led to Microsoft acquiring Bethesda and Activision Blizzard. With the purchase of the latter cementing the downward spiral of the Xbox brand that started with the inception of Game Pass. Even though the purchase of Bethesda in 2021 was controversial, the announcement that Microsoft intended to buy Activision just a year after finalizing the purchase of Bethesda was the final straw for many. People said that Microsoft buying up publisher after publisher was the beginning of a monopoly. This view was only strengthened after the court findings during the trial revealed a document that had the list of potential acquisition targets for Microsoft, which included basically the entire gaming industry. But yeah, they definitely don't want to start a monopoly. Sure. But that isn't the reason I'm bringing up the Activision acquisition. The main point is the eyes that were put on Xbox during this move, especially for Microsoft leadership, since their handling of Xbox changed drastically since the acquisition of Activision has been finalized. We of course don't know why or how the Activision acquisition was approved by Microsoft leadership, but if I had to guess, it was probably because head of Xbox, Phil Spencer, probably argued that this is what they needed to get Game Pass to the next level. The best-selling game in the US almost every year, Call of Duty, and king for their mobile IPs like Candy Crush, which, fun fact, make more money than the entire rest of Activision combined. With this acquisition, Game Pass's lofty goals could be made reality. This is of course conjecture on my part, but something along those lines probably happened back then. And with that, the acquisition was approved, but at an immense cost to the Xbox brand. $70 billion is the largest acquisition in tech history, and the amount of money that has to be made yearly to even think about recouping that money is staggering. And to make that money back and show them good old shareholders continuous growth, cost-cutting measures have to be employed. This includes the mass layoffs of 1,900 employees across Activision and Xbox game studios, the closure of the 4 aforementioned studios, and the quote-unquote widening of their target platforms. See, the leaders at Microsoft never really held exclusives in high regard and wanted Xbox to ship their games on platforms other than Xbox for a while now. But you need exclusives to sell consoles, and the heads of Xbox could probably explain them as a necessity in the console business. But with all the leverage being in the hands of the Microsoft execs post-acquisition, Xbox leadership really didn't have a choice at that point. Leadership at Xbox lost the internal power struggle, and now Xbox, one of the 3 major console manufacturers, publishes their major first-party games on rival platforms like the PS5 and the Switch. This is just ludicrous, cause how is one of the big 3 publishing their tentpole first-party games on your rival platforms? Like, why buy an Xbox at this point? It sure as fuck isn't because of the games. Because at this point you can ask yourself at every future showing of a new Xbox game, when will that come to PlayStation or Switch? The only thing Xbox got going for it at this point is that you can save money on Gamepass, but that isn't the killer feature they think it is. Gamers will show up every time to buy a game that is worth the price to them. People to this day buy Mario Kart 8 on Switch for $60 because they think it's worth the price. But instead of hunkering down and making games that will sell their console, Xbox is now solely centering their business strategy on the subscription service Gamepass. Hey, future detail here. The script for this video has been in the oven for a while now, but something happened recently that I just needed to include in the video. Microsoft just announced another price increase for Gamepass, which came with a complete restructuring of the service. But isn't it weird? Increasing the price of the service not long after acquiring Activision Blizzard for $70 billion? Oh well. Good that no one assured us that the acquisition won't cause the price of Game Pass to rise. Now that would... Oh, you motherfucker! Well. Microsoft essentially just proved my entire point with their Game Pass restructuring. The whole play games day one, their whole selling point for the service is being removed from the basic tier of the service. First party games will now arrive 6 months to a year post-release on the base tier of Game Pass. Oh wait, sorry, I just made a little mistake there. Microsoft also fucked up their naming scheme to trip up customers with this new update. We now have Game Pass Core, which gives you online access and a small games collection, and the standard tier, which comes with the big games catalog without the day one releases. You know, I don't really expect Microsoft of all companies to come up with a good naming scheme for something, but come on. Even you guys can do better than that. Day one releases are now exclusive to PC Game Pass and Game Pass Ultimate, which will run you a respective $12 and $20 a month. PC gamers are getting a notably better deal than their console counterparts, but hey, they still can get some growth there, so they can't treat them as bad as the guys that actually buy their hardware, I guess. Releasing all first-party games day one into Game Pass just isn't sustainable, and them increasing the prices and restructuring Game Pass is proof enough of that. But if that isn't enough, just think about how Microsoft is releasing their games nowadays. They now add early access to the more expensive editions of their first-party games, so that if you want to play the games on the actual release date, you gotta pay up for that version despite being on Game Pass. All Xbox does at this point serves Game Pass, all for this bum-ass subscription service that is dragging their business down the gutter. All this thanks to the now head of Microsoft Gaming, Phil Spencer, and his team. We sure do gotta thank him for that. Good old buddy, old pal, old friendo, Phil Spencer, the gaming executive who cares about us, the gamers, and wants only the best for us. He wears gaming shirts to presentations and poses for photos with fans. He's just like us for real. Except, no nigga, this is just another executive putting on a front for all of us. He doesn't care about the gamers or anything like that. He's here to sell you a product, nothing more, nothing less. But the front he puts on is so convincing that people are feeling all betrayed by him. Because Xbox is doing so bad and that their first party titles now ship on other platforms. This supposed savior of gaming is just here to sell all of us a product, and he's seemingly not very good at it. We're in the second half of the 9th gen at this point, and their competitors outside them at a ratio of 5-1, which is a downright disgusting ratio to be outsold by, for being real. Like, nigga, fight back at least a little bit, my god. Phil Spencer and his team may have saved Xbox after the horrible launch of the Xbox One, but are now the primary reason why the Xbox is dying. With the horrible decision to put all their eggs into this subscription service, Phil Spencer put Xbox on a newest downward spiral. I mean, he's the same guy that gave us this banger of a quote just last year, and I quote, "Just making great games won't change Xbox console market share." Like, my guy, how do you think consoles are being sold in the first place? what is the biggest reason people buy consoles for? It's the games, Phil, and it always has been since the inception of this industry. People don't go, oh boy, am I glad I bought my Nintendo Switch for Nintendo Switch Online and its legacy games catalog. No nigga, no one says that. People buy their Switches because they want to play shit like Tears of the Kingdom or that new Animal Crossing game. And PlayStation is the same. People don't pick up a PlayStation because of PlayStation Plus Extra. They buy it for games like God of War Ragnarok or the next Ghost of Tsushima. And it shows, with these games selling tens of millions of copies. But you would know that if you guys at least somewhat frequently released amazing games like in competitors. But you don't, because you guys mismanage your studios. Like, you guys had a franchise that could stand toe to toe with Nintendo and PlayStation, but what happened to that? The latest release of that series, which you literally put on the box of the series consoles in the beginning, and was supposed to launch with the consoles, was delayed a whole year because 343 couldn't get their shit together. The studio that is developing your most important IP, Halo, couldn't make it to launch because the studio is mismanaged to hell and back. Relying on an overabundance of contract workers who can't work any longer than 18 months at the company because you would have to hire them if they stayed any longer is insane. Plus having to train contractors for months to use the game engine in the first place is a recipe for disaster. Like, how are you this stingy with money at your arguably most important studio? Heck, even the Halo TV show is widely hated by fans of the series, something that should have been a home run for them, and revitalized interest into the franchise. But hey, it's Xbox, so they of course hired people for the project who didn't care about the source material. Something that their competitors seemingly easily avoided because they had their own creatives on set to make sure that their IPs are handled correctly. If Xbox mismanages the studio that is making their most prized IP, Halo, to the point that the IP is basically irrelevant in the current shooter space, how can we have them buy entire publishers wholesale at all? If the aforementioned Redfall and the studio closures are anything to go by, I have no hope for Xbox game studios at this point. And all this for Game Pass. We're at a point where PlayStation now outsells Xbox at a ratio of 5-1 and already have more than double the amount of systems sold. Some third-party publishers even question why they ship on Xbox at all at this point, due to flatlining sales on the Microsoft-owned platform. Since Xbox players have been trained to just wait for the games to arrive on Game Pass instead of buying them, the amount of times I read stuff like, I'll wait till it releases on Game Pass under the announcement of a new game is honestly just sad. Heck, I better not be seeing Microsoft try and buy any more studios after what happened with Tango and Arcane Austin either. I don't even want to imagine their next cost-cutting measures after the acquisition of another publisher. I'm not someone to call for people's jobs, but the leadership at Xbox needs to change sooner rather than later. And the focus of their business needs to become the console again, not a subscription service or renting games. Because if nothing changes here, Game Pass will be the death of Xbox. This was Deteo, and Xbox, you guys need to get your shit together, man.